My final tour in the Navy as an air combat maneuvering instructor was a plum assignment. So how did I come to my decision to get out when things were going so well? Let me start with a little backstory. In early 1980, my wife Jean and I had previously experienced one miscarriage, and we were pregnant again, hoping for a full-term healthy baby in August. Jimmy Carter was president, and he was toying around with the idea of paying retention bonuses for pilots. For me, it wasn't about the money, it was the lifestyle. If I stayed in for another sea tour, I would be a flight lead instead of a wingman and going for a 20-year retirement. Not career inclined, I put in my letter of resignation for 11 months down the road, such that we would have already given birth to a healthy child or not, and I would either stay in or proceed with getting out if our child was healthy. So I commenced a regimen of research and study that I never had to do in college because I was an NROTC midshipman. The day after I got my diploma, I was commissioned an ensign USN. Both of my UVA roommates were struggling for the next step, one applying to be a Rhodes Scholar and the other applying for UVA law. Unfortunately, neither of them succeeded at their respective endeavors, but they did go on to very successful careers. I fairly amazed myself at my industry procuring about 11 books on various topics: how to write a resume, how to figure out what it was that you could or wanted to do in a career. 2 books in particular, What Color is Your Parachute? And The Interviewer's Handbook, stood out. The parachute book was the first edition, and I thought it was sophomoric in having me actually write down what it is I like to do and what I didn't like to do, etc. In retrospect, it was a very important exercise to inventory myself on paper. I guess I'm an alpha type in that I want to be in the driver's seat and not on somebody's staff. The Interviewer's Handbook was given to me by a headhunter, and for the life of me, I cannot find any evidence of its existence on Google. I learned 2 very important things. 1, the psychology of the interview, and 2, the objective of the interviewer. Namely, he must size you up and decide if you will impress his boss if he sends you up the line to him or her. So it behooves you to know what the company does and what the skills or personality traits you have that will serve them well. Surprisingly, and a bonus, the author went on a tangent in one chapter to discuss sales. He explained that many of the CEOs and companies came up through the ranks via the sales channel. As a child, the only salespeople I saw were door-to-door, Fuller Brush, Encyclopedia Britannica. Today it's Solar Power. Not a very distinguished or impressive occupation based on my mother's rant after getting rid of the foot in the door. But a truly good salesperson can save a very business executive a lot of time. For example, Mr. Smith, I understand your manufacturing process and that getting from point delta to echo, you have a challenge that my product will help you overcome. Give me 2 minutes of your time, I can explain. Guess what? You'll probably get that 2 minutes because the executive recognizes that you understand, 1, his job, and 2, your product as it applies to his job. That's sales. The best sales reps in some corporations can out-earn some of the senior suits. This non sequitur chapter completely changed my outlook, and sales leading to management became my career objective. During Thanksgiving 1980, we were at my parents' home in Virginia Beach when my father suggested that I talk to his broker at Payne Weber in Norfolk. Dad, you need some highfalutin degree in finance to go into investments. But nobody else is talking to me right now. I'll do it. So I called his guy, Duncan, who was very gracious and basically explained that as a stockbroker, financial advisor, you are not the analyst, you are the conduit between the client and the analyst. You are not selling aluminum siding, you are selling intangibles, and the better you understand your intangibles and convey that to your client, the more successful you will be. I came away with the understanding that yes, this is something I can do, and in fact, the industry will train me. The hiring process starts with the manager in the office where you would like to work. I went back to the drawing board to line up a series of Norfolk companies to solicit. We returned to Key West with a copy of the Norfolk Yellow Pages. I pulled 7 companies out: Merrill Lynch, Payne Weber, Kidder Peabody, E.F. Hutton, Prudential Bache, Davenport, and one more I cannot remember. But I do remember who responded: Merrill Lynch, Kidder Peabody, and E.F. Hutton. Remember the ad? When E.F. Hutton talks, people listen. A squadron mate, call sign Bluto, on hearing what I was up to, recited, when Gordo Hayworth talks, people vomit. Thanks for the endorsement, Bluto. Being able to take rejection in sales is an important skill. So I fired off letters to the 7 companies, and soon I had received 3 replies inviting me to schedule on-site interviews in Norfolk: Merrill, Kidder, and Hutton. The others were not hiring or did not reply. My foray into round 1 of interviews was promising-ish. I was able to fly an A-4 Skyhawk to Oceana on a dual mission to satisfy the needs of the Navy and to make my interviews. At E.F. Hutton, I took some kind of a timed test in which I had to write as many words that started with the letter S, and I spent some time speaking with Sam C., the manager, who would be in touch after reviewing my timed test results. Later that day, I recognized that Ben H. at Kidder Peabody was a little cool, so I poured on the coals, explaining that as a Navy flight instructor, I was not afraid of 16-hour days working to get the job done. While knowing little about the securities industry, I appreciated the fact that metaphorically, you had to spread seeds out in the field and expect rain to wash a lot of them into the river. But with persistence and patience, seedlings would sprout. That visibly pumped him up such that he was willing to fly me to Philadelphia at my earliest convenience to meet the muckety-mucks at Kidder's headquarters. Yay! Then there was Merrill Lynch experience. I showed up for my interview only to find that the manager was not in. He forgot to post my interview on his calendar. Instead, I was interviewed by Steve S., a broker who was to be the manager of the Merrill's Virginia Beach office when it opened in February of 1981. Disappointing knowing that Steve could not make a hiring decision, I flew back to Key West, not having advanced the Merrill Lynch hiring agenda. The following week, I received a call from the late Jim Crocker, embarrassed for missing my interview. Steve S., a former Air Force pilot who interviewed me, had said to me, "I'll always hire a pilot. They're used to telling people what to do." I guess he gave Crocker a ringing endorsement because Crocker said he would like to see me when I come back to Norfolk for round 2 of my interviews. Coincidentally, he too was a UVA grad and a member of the same fraternity I was in. Several weeks later, I was back up in Norfolk. On this visit, priority 1 was getting with Jim Crocker at Merrill Lynch. He interviewed me for about an hour and 15 minutes, and I have to say it was the best interview and exercise of all my resources and how to deal with an interview. He even asked me if one of my college roommates was there, and he asked him what my biggest fault would be. What would he say? I played it coy and said that he would expect me to be very militaristic in a civilian environment. How so? Well, 1 o'clock is 1300, things like that. But when I went into the military, I only spoke college time, and I adapted quickly. I had every expectation that I would readapt to civilian life as well. After the interview, Crocker thanked me and said he needed to make some phone calls and he'd be back to me. Later that day, back to E.F. Hutton, I was made an offer of $12,000 a year. Could I make it on that? My answer was that if it is what I have to do, I could make some sacrifices to make it work. So I had that in my back pocket. While I was at the Hutton offices, my father called and asked to speak to me. There were no cell phones or Blackberries in those days. He said that Crocker had called him and would like me to come by when I was free. Even if it would be after 5 p.m., he would wait for me. Walking across the street, I was greeted at the Merrill office for the second time that day. Getting right to the point, Crocker asked what salary I needed, to which I replied $16,800. He said he would hire me at $18,000. While Merrill had a required simulation they put candidates through, he had procured a waiver so I would not have to do it. I could start on whatever date suited me, and when the Virginia Beach office opened, I would go there. I was floored. Yes, thank you, sir, but I have some other hoops to jump through before I can decide. No problem. It was early enough in the day so that I could walk back to Sam at Hutton and tell him that I would not be able to accept his offer since I had been made an offer that would not require sacrifices. He asked what I had been offered, and I declined to answer since I was not interested in entering a bidding war. He thanked me, and we parted friends. Kidder Peabody. This is where the real fun begins. With the Merrill offer in my back pocket, I caught my flight to Philadelphia for my second round of interviews at the Kidder Peabody headquarters. On arrival, I was greeted by the head honcho and proceeded to spend time with different brokers interviewing in their respective offices. For lunch, they had one of the real smooth brokers to host me, and he paid with a gold American Express card, which I thought was very cool. The afternoon was more interviews, and one in particular was, well, earth-shattering would not be an overstatement. I was introduced to this one senior partner, Tom. Tom, with a high and tight haircut, had my folder on his desk and proceeded with a long, drawn-out soliloquy during which he said, if the perfect candidate came through that door, he would be from one of the better schools and a company like Xerox or IBM, where he had to know a machine and its operating capabilities to explain to prospective buyers. At this point, I shut down. He went on, blather, and finally finished and asked if I had any questions. I rolled my finger backwards and said, early on, you said if the perfect candidate came through that door, he would be from one of the better schools and have familiarity with a product like an IBM or a Xerox machine. You have my resume in front of you and see that I went to the University of Virginia. Obviously, you don't think that's one of the better schools. I do. As for familiarity with a Xerox or IBM product, you can see that I flew supersonic jets off an aircraft carrier. Let me tell you that the pilot who flies that aircraft understands the complex interaction of hydraulic, aerodynamic, pneumatic, fuel, and electric systems better than the mechanics that work on the aircraft. Therefore, the conclusion I come to is that you cannot get a perfect candidate in here. Tom sputtered in shock, realizing what he had done. I did not hear what he had to say until he ended and asked if I had any questions. The only word I said was no, and I left. At that point, with the Merrill offer in my back pocket, I knew I was through with Kidder Peabody and wanted to go home. But it occurred to me that it would look very bad for Ben back in Norfolk if I just packed up and left. Besides, I wanted to see if I was going to get an offer anyway. Well, the short answer is I did get the offer. Ben said if I needed $16,800, they would pay me $16,800. I thanked him and said that I would be back to him soon. I rode the elevator down, walked around the building, and then came back up to his office and was shown in. When I told Ben I was going to take the Merrill offer, his grin turned to a snarl, and gimlet-eyed, he sniffed that if I need the big Merrill Lynch behind me, then I would be better off there. He then asked me when I had made this decision. replying yesterday in Philadelphia and that he would want to know what happened, I told him. His eyes got big as the tale unfolded, and I told him that while I was done, there was no way I would come to keep Kidder Peabody. I surmised that it would make him look terrible if I just packed up and left. Ben seemed to breathe a great sigh of relief. Yes, he was mortified, and we left on good terms. Ironically, about a year later, he called me at Merrill and asked how things were going. They were going fine. He was just testing the water.